Welcome. It's now time to get our next session underway. I would like to introduce Dr. Tristan Casey, who is a lecturer at Griffith's University Safety Science Innovation Lab. Welcome to the forum, Tristan.
Thank you.
Tristan is an experienced and endorsed organisational psychologist with extensive experience in work health and safety. He's currently working on research around the management of safety amid COVID-19, psychological safety and safety climate. So Tristan, whereabouts are you broadcasting from today?
Just from Brisbane at the Griffith University Nathan campus today.
And no doubt the weather is nicer than what we've got here in Geelong, wet and raining.
Oh, it's beautiful today. It's really fined up today. It's nice.
I know where I'd much rather be. Well, let's move on. So we are really looking forward to hearing about more about safety capability and regulating major hazard facilities during a pandemic. Following the session, there will be time for questions. So if you do have a question for Tristan, you can post it at any time throughout the session in the Q&A box on the right of your screen. So over to you, Tristan.
Thank you so much, Yvette. Yeah, lovely to be here this morning and really looking forward to sharing some insights from a major program of research that we've been doing over the past, about 12 to 14 months so far with the Office of Industrial Relations. So yeah, we're talking about safety capability today, and I wanted to, I guess, set the scene initially, talk about some of the challenges that major hazard facilities face along with other high-risk organizations, and then move into more of a specific discussion about what safety capability is, perhaps how you could learn how to, I guess, implement that concept a little bit more effectively in your organizations, and some potential next steps that you could engage in to get the ball rolling. So we know that the modern workplace is fraught with challenges, and COVID has taught us this in spades, I suppose. There's been lots of, I guess, issues and challenges that we've faced over the past 12 months. But more broader than COVID, there's been other challenges that we've faced, and I'll just go through a few of those in a moment. So with the process industries, major hazard facilities are obviously quite intimately involved with process safety. What we see in some of those challenges that these organizations face is, of course, massive volatility. Commodity prices, the products that they produce, the prices of those fluctuate and vary dramatically. And of course, that influences the way that safety is managed, because if we have massive changes in the market, that obviously flows through to safety decision making, resource availability, and just generally what sorts of capabilities we can build in our organizations due to that changing price dynamic. We also have a rapidly shifting technological environment. It's a bit of a cliche now that we talk about technology changing and the flow-on effects to how organizations manage safety. But particularly within the process industries, we know that many technologies are becoming automated, which tends to introduce somewhat of a paradox that we're so reliant on those technologies to manage the process and sort of continually monitor and evaluate the safety of that process reaction or that product that we're developing. But when things go wrong, we need to rely on the people to recover the situation and actually improvise, perhaps be proactive. But if we do rely on technology too much, those skills deteriorate. So there's a bit of a challenge there that organizations have to balance, this idea of automation versus augmentation. On the one hand, do we automate our technologies and try to eliminate the human? Or do we instead try to augment human capabilities and really try to keep them skilled up and really focused on managing the risk in their organizations? And thirdly, we've seen, unfortunately, a number of high-profile disasters within the major hazard area. Of course, we've had the BP Macondo issue that happened many years ago now, but more recently, the explosion in Beirut obviously showed us that the insidious nature of these hazards still exists. And with that, we see, I guess, a growing scrutiny from society, from governments, many campaigns and enforcement programs being implemented directed at the major hazard area, particularly to try and find out, are there any other sources of danger lurking there behind the scenes? And so when it comes to trying to break through some of these challenges, maybe we need a better way or a newer way of managing workplace safety. Just wanted to highlight some research I've been doing recently on COVID, and particularly in relation to the way that organizations manage safety during that pandemic, or the ongoing pandemic, of course. What you're seeing here is a graph that shows the responses from about 400 safety managers and practitioners across Australia And the graph shows that there are, I guess, two very different experiences of these practitioners during COVID. On the one hand, there was a group of safety managers that was very much supported. They were given a lot of autonomy, a lot of involvement in decision making, and they are shown by the green bars. And the opposite situation is where there were some safety managers that were maybe sidelined or not really brought to the table during that crisis. And so we see some very different outcomes for them. What these graphs show is just some personal, I guess, outcomes or variables that we measured across these practitioners. And so for the organisations where there was a great, much a positive change in terms of the support and involvement of safety professionals, we saw much more positive outcomes for them in terms of reduced burnout, a very inflated and positive sense of meaning in their job, lower job security, and overall positive affect or emotion. That's in contrast to where there was a negative experience, where the safety professionals were sidelined. Higher burnout, lower job meaning, much higher job insecurity, and overall a sense of negative affect or emotion. And so we're still looking at the flow-on effects from the way that organisations handled the pandemic, and particularly the way they handled their safety staff. But preliminary data is suggesting that the way that the strategies they took and whether they involved their personnel or not really will determine the trajectory of their recovery moving forward. What we describe COVID as is a bit of a pressure cooker in terms of the dilemmas and tensions that it surfaced. It really intensified some of these challenges that organisations, and indeed in major hazard facilities as well, that we would have had to have grappled with and managed throughout this pandemic. There's a few here listed, and I'll just talk briefly to some of those dilemmas that we saw through our research. There was a dilemma of information, where on the one hand, organisations would try to, I guess, provide too much information and maybe overwhelm their workforces with all the changing requirements around COVID management. And on the other hand, some organisations maybe were too quiet and didn't provide enough data about what's going on to reassure their staff. The other tension or dilemma that organisations manage was this business tension, the idea of focusing on the finances or focusing on the people, the human resources. And again, we saw some stark differences there between how organisations balance that tension, typically choosing to maybe focus on the financial situation rather than the human factor. Decision-making also either centralised or decentralised. Again, we saw some quite stark differences, particularly early on in the pandemic. Some organisations might have felt it was their duty to be quite centralised and make very effective decisions by putting that up to the senior managers. And others decided, well, let's bring the experts in and really consult and engage our workforce to make sure that we've got the best information we have at the time. And lastly, the performance dilemma, the focus on either compliance and sort of enforcing strict COVID standards versus encouraging people to be proactive and come up with innovative new ways of managing safety during this pandemic. And so COVID really brought these tensions to the surface, and really a lot of organisations did struggle to balance some of these competing goals or dilemmas, as we've just discussed. We're still discovering what the best combination was, but very, very at a high level, the organisations that were able to balance or reconcile those two competing demands seem to perform much better. I'd just like to introduce now, we've sort of talked there about the problem or the issues that organisations face, and particularly in the high hazard facility areas. But what we see next is, well, what can we do about it? What's the potential solution that we can potentially engage in to make a difference and actually resolve some of these challenges and tensions? And I'd like to argue today that safety capability, a new concept that was derived from the oil and gas sector, and has since become I guess a burgeoning program of research that we're running here in collaboration with some regulators and multiple academic institutions. So safety capability is potentially a way forward for yourselves and for other high-risk organisations to more successfully manage these tensions and dilemmas and issues that may impact safety management. So first of all, what is this thing called safety capability? It's really an interesting concept because it's designed, it just seems to be a perfect fit for many of the challenges that we've just described. So safety capability was developed in 2014 by Professor Mark Griffin and his team, now at Curtin University. And they defined it as, I guess, having three different components: the ability of major hazard facilities, or perhaps any organization that fits within that high hazard area, to be successful in what they do and produce their product, produce their process, and safe in conditions of uncertainty, complexity, and task interdependence. So safety capability is a bit different to culture and climate concepts, because it's really closely connected to the environment in which these organizations function. So it's really linked to this idea of the uncertainty that we now face in the modern world, the rising complexity in terms of technology, and the various processes that we use to produce our products. And also thinks about, well, there's many different, I guess, tasks that require multiple persons to work on it simultaneously. We're seeing a lot more of a rise in teamwork. The effectiveness of leadership becomes more critical. And so safety capability was really designed from the ground up to tackle some of these challenges that we have in the modern workplace. So a little bit more about what it is. As I mentioned, we've embarked on a pretty rigorous program of research to look at, and I guess, expanding this idea of safety capability to make it more concrete, and actually link it to, I guess, multiple safety theories and ideas. So safety capability can be broken down into three different elements or components, and together, or they combine to create this emergent property in the organization, that they are capable of being safe and successful. The first is energy. So energy is defined as the potential to maintain the priority on safety, even when you're confronted with some of those dilemmas and tensions. So when production and safety conflict, or when there's even maybe tensions or conflicts between person and process safety, the energy dimension of capability is really all about, well, we maintain a focus on paying attention to what matters most. And that, in terms of prioritizing the health and safety of the people involved in the work process, and also the safety of the actual process itself. So we will unpack a little bit more about what that looks like in a moment. The second one is proficiency. So proficiency is really just, I guess, getting the basics right when it comes to safety. So coordinating and deploying resources to reduce risk. So some examples might be, good quality teamwork, high quality communication, what we call mindfully complying, where you're thinking through how you're applying the process or procedure, and not just ticking the box or going for a surface compliance approach. And most importantly, or one of the last elements, is agility. So given that the modern environment is dynamic and changes pretty regularly, agility is all about this potential to anticipate what could go wrong, or how could we maybe manage some of the issues that could come up as we deploy our work process, and manage those live, manage those effectively and reduce the risk as we go about doing those tasks. So energy, proficiency, agility together make up this concept called safety capability. So why would we bother looking at this concept? Why is it maybe important or different? Well, there's at least 5 different reasons that I can think of why it's a good thing to invest your time and attention on. So we've already talked about this top point, I guess, through the previous slides. It's a practical concept that's tied to the environment. So we're not just saying, it's all about the organization itself and looking introspectively at what it can do. It's also concerned with, well, what types of environmental conditions do we face, the uncertainty, the complexity, the interdependence. So it's very much aligned with the modern workplace demands. The second point explains how tangibles affect intangibles. That's really a criticism of some of the safety culture work, which sort of suggests that, well, there's this sort of, magical, black box situation where you just build this system or put this behavior process in place and somehow you'll get results. Safety capability goes a step beyond and says, well, sure, we don't dismiss the fact that organizational culture is important, but we really want to make sure that we're making that link between the intangibles and the tangibles quite salient. And I'll talk about this idea of capitals in a moment, which makes that link. Safety capability, unlike some of the other concepts, has a track record of measurement. So it's got a good I guess, baseline or foundation to work from. Avoids all the endless debate and confusion that safety culture can bring. And perhaps most importantly, it combines lots of different ideas and models and theories about how to do safety effectively. So we're not just parking ourselves in one camp or one particular approach, but we're looking across, high reliability organizing, safety culture, system safety. behaviour-based safety. We're looking at all those different aspects together and what the best of all those different aspects together can mean. So how do we create it? And I mentioned this briefly just before, is this idea of enabling capital. So this is the tangible stuff that we can practically do. If we get this right, then the safety capability property will emerge in our organizations. So there's 3 different capitals that we can draw upon, and this is, I guess, science that's been well established in the management literature. And those 3 capitals are organisational capital, social capital, and human capital. And I guess to give you a little bit of an idea about what each one of those capitals is, organisational capital is our tangible systems and processes. So, you know, what sort of safety management system do we have? Is our incident investigation working effectively? You know, is our training and development in place and being and effective at creating you know, competency amongst our staff? Social capital refers to the, I guess, a little less tangible in terms of leadership practices and teamwork practices. So sort of like building trust and that sort of really embedded social capital across the organization, high quality relationships between leaders and between team members. And lastly, the human capital is really about the knowledge, skills, and motivations that we can bring to the job. So really it hones in on what are the individual practices that people can demonstrate to sort of contribute to this broader concept of safety capability. Now, if we put those 2 elements together, so the safety capability dimensions and the capitals together, we roughly get this 9-cell matrix, and you can quickly see how those combinations work. So for example, we won't have organisational capital with each of the 3 safety capability dimensions, social and human. So together we can start to narrow in our focus when we come to measure and developing and improving, and really start to unpack what is what does the nuts and bolts of safety capability look like. To give you a little bit more of a drill down there into what that looks like tangibly, each one of those 9 combinations of the capitals and the capability has a bunch of theories and ideas and particularly survey measures behind them that organizations can use to tap into each one of those elements. So for example, you know, the commitment that managers, supervisors, and co-workers show to safety is part of the energy dimension. We've got things like the shared understanding of the task ahead, and that's sort of really what we call a shared mental model that the team develops as they plan out their day and think ahead to what could go wrong and how to make things right. So that's one of the proficiency dimensions. And just going down to one of the agility dimensions in the human capital space, preventing mistakes and learning is a critical bundle of behaviours or practices that we can measure, grow and improve to help contribute to that broader idea of safety capability. So really the key point of this slide is that, well, there's 9 different elements together that make up safety capability together overall, and we can measure each one, we can develop each one, and if we get all of those ingredients you know, maximized or optimized, we should be much more effective at managing safety in those high-risk settings. So a little bit of, I guess, backstory here and some supporting data. So as I mentioned, we've done a bunch of studies. We've done about 5 or 6, I think it's actually 6 now, studies on this particular topic, ranging from international samples through to very specific Queensland-centric samples across multiple industries. And what we found with the scores on the safety capability measure, the survey tool we've developed, is that it's related to a bunch of important outcomes. So the number of errors that people make in their work, the near misses they experience, major organizational accidents over the past 6 months. So when people respond to the safety capability measure, those with higher scores are less likely to say that their organizations have had a serious incident, maybe a process safety breach or a significant property damage event. And also this crosses over into the psychological health and well-being space, which is really important these days, given that it's becoming more prevalent, more prominent. Organizations are recognizing their obligations and even their moral duty to help preserve psychological health in the workplace. And so safety capability is negatively related to burnout and exhaustion, 2 important factors that predict work outcomes, and positively related to job satisfaction and overall employee engagement in their work. So it seems to be quite a powerful tool that crosses over different domains. The so what? Well, I guess in coming to the end of the little presentation today, just wanted to leave you with some thoughts. And probably the first one to ask yourself is, well, what models or frameworks are you using to drive safety management? Do you have a particular theory or idea that's sort of your pet theory or your go-to idea about how to manage safety? Is it a safety culture kind of flavor? Is it more about high reliability organizing? And if that's so, if you do have one or two key things that you draw from, is there an opportunity here to start to think more broadly and level it up to think about safety capability overall? Perhaps there are different models or ideas or frameworks that you could bring in to expand your horizons and think differently about what makes for a safe and effective organization. If based on what I described there around safety capability, is that something where you would feel confident that you know where you're at, where you're sitting, perhaps where are your opportunity areas and where are your strengths? And how are you, I guess, developing that property of safety capability? Do you have multiple programs? I'm sure you do, but are they all aligned and sort of driving towards these three elements of capability in terms of the energy, the proficiency, and the agility? Are you working on each one of those, or maybe are you prioritizing one over the other? And maybe there's some gaps there in your initiatives or programs to drive safety capability in your workplace. So next steps, always looking for research partners. So if you are curious about safety capability, you want to learn more, please do reach out. More than happy to discuss any aspect of the presentation or the work that we've been doing. We have submitted for a big industry project with the Queensland government, so we'll know about that later this year. But there could be some opportunities there for you to become involved. So it's always good to flag those early and sort of be part of the action if you are interested in looking at that research. Also wanted to put a plug for one of my colleagues, Jose Martinez, who works for the Office of Industrial Relations and is a student here at Griffith. He's building another tool which is very much aligned with this particular setting and is looking to sort of narrow in the safety capability discussion a little bit more rather than building an industry agnostic tool, something that's very specific to major hazard facilities. And there are a couple of resources that are provided where you can look at a bit more detail on these concepts. So one from Mark Griffin, another article more recently from myself and the team. So if you are curious, read those and then get in touch with any questions that you might have. But that's it from me. There's some contact details there if you are curious to look into it more. But happy to answer any questions if they've come through, Yvette, if we've heard from the audience there.
Yes, we do have some questions coming through. So thank you so much for your presentation. It's certainly important to understand the impact the pandemic is having on industries such as major hazard facilities and learn what needs to be done to keep everyone safe. Now, just quickly before we do move on to the question and answer section, if anyone is having any technical issues, there are a few troubleshooting things you can try. There's an audio video issues link under the live stream window that will allow you to try to switch to some backup streams. Those are hosted in different locations by different service providers, so that may solve the problem if they've blocked the stream. Other than that, you could try a different device or network and see if that solves any connection issues. Now, as we said, we'd love everyone to be part of the conversation via the Q&A box, and we do have some questions, so let's get started. First one for you, Tristan. Do you think that decision-making was made more difficult with senior engineers being removed from the facilities due to COVID-19? This person says Longford comes to mind. Did technology make it easier to be removed and still make good decisions?
Yeah, great point. And I was really hoping to get a student to help me with this question because she was interested in it as well. And yeah, I think what we saw initially was probably a bit of confusion and chaos as people did shift to the remote working. I know from the safety manager study that many managers were quite frustrated at their inability to get out on site and actually have that interpersonal interaction. But as the pandemic evolved and people adapt, humans are excellent at this property. I think we learned different ways to maintain that communication link and still make better good enough decisions given the demands of the scenario. So the regular catch-ups and expanding your relational network, so talking to people that you might not have actually spoken to before, was really one of the key learnings we had from the safety manager study, that the managers there expanded their relational networks, started talking to different departments and build bridges and break down some of the silos that had existed So if anything, I think, depending upon the organisation, it could have actually been an opportunity to make better decisions with more effective communication.
Great, thanks for that response. I've got another question here. How does safety capability here differ from safety capacity as per safety differently, safety 2 terminology? And what's the importance of these differences in terms of safety practice?
Yeah, sure. So I think safety capacity would be more about, if you're thinking about it as a very strict definition, it's the ability to maybe, cope with disruptions, or the ability to absorb various, issues that might come up as you're performing the work. Whereas capability is probably a little bit broader. It would encompass that concept of the ability of the work team to flex and bend in response to demands, but then also look at more broadly, how is maybe the social system set up to promote that capacity? How is the training and development systems flowing through to promote that? So I think it's probably encompassing of that and a little bit broader in its treatment.
Great. And we've got another question. Do you anticipate this framework to be a safety management system in the future?
No, I don't think so. It's probably more to assess the health of existing safety management systems. So we've got plenty of those to choose from, 45,001 being one of the more recent ones. But I think, there's probably enough out there already for that, to structure how people manage safety. This is more, what's going well, what's not. Do we have any gaps in how that's implemented? So I think it's more of a health indicator that can help, to identify improvement initiatives moving forward.
Thank you. We've still got more questions coming through. So the
Okay.
Next one, how is the safety capability and psychological safety related?
Sure. So within the capability framework, those 9 cells that we talked about, there is a concept that we call, it's the technical term is actually psychological safety climate, but it's a bit misleading, that term, because what it refers to is the willingness to take an interpersonal risk, the acceptance of diversity, this willingness for everyone to have a say in the team environment. Now, that's really important for a range of outcomes, not just safety, because for good safety, we need good information. So listening to everyone, regardless of their rank, their status, their position in the organization, is a good thing. But obviously that also has flow-on effects for feeling accepted, feeling part of the organization, having that strong sense of commitment to the organization as well, because you're feeling treated well and involved and welcomed into that environment. So capability includes factors that are sort of like the core ingredients you'd want to get right to benefit not only safety, but also psychological health as well.
Great, thank you. Here's another one. Can you speak some more to how to categorise the safety managers as either supported or not supported? Were there some in between?
Yeah, good point. I mean, we did try and divide them into 2 camps just because it's, a compelling story if you've got something that's, a little bit more definitive. But really what we saw is from those interviews we did during COVID, we did five different sets of interviews with the same people over the past year. And we did find, at least initially, that they were divided into those 2 camps. One that was sidelined and perhaps not given a seat at the table in the crisis management, and another where they were really boosted up and empowered and really encouraged to do what we call job crafting. So this idea of expanding your role definitions, jumping into other tasks you might not have done, talking to other people and expanding your relationships, as I mentioned before. And also just thinking about, well, how am I contributing to the organization's response, and how am I making a difference to its resilience? So there's I guess, just, lots of benefits, I think, that study has shown, that in terms of getting your safety team more involved in the decision making, particularly during crises.
Sure, thank you. And we still have some time for another question. So do you have metrics, KPIs defined to measure these various dimensions of safety capability?
Yeah, so we've got a draft survey tool that we've just built with the Office of Industrial Relations, and they're doing some pilot work on it now. So I think they're getting about 30 organisations in Queensland to help, I guess, build some more data around it. We don't have any definitive benchmarks or, score above this and you're good, and score below that and you're bad. But more just the ability to, we can measure it validly, we can tap into the right things. But the next step is to collect that additional more diagnostic data and have the next level of detail.
Great. And just another question, how do you shift an organisation's focus from safety barriers to consideration of safety capability?
Yeah, good point. I mean, it is such a new thing that we haven't really done any intervention studies with it yet, which we hope to do soon. I guess when it comes to the sell on this thing, the biggest sell that I can think of is really it's an integrative concept. So we're not trying to sell the next flavor of safety, or we're not coming up with the next pet theory that seems to make sense, but more just what can we learn from every single theory that's come, over the past 150 years, and put that all together into one package. So it's trying to take the best of all worlds, everything that we know about safety, and try and distill it down into what matters most. So if I was selling it, that's probably what I would concentrate on. Is this is a new way of looking at safety that really just, I guess, picks up things that we know work well.
Great. And I think we've got time for one final question. Do you anticipate this framework to be a safety management system in the future?
Yeah, I think we covered something similar just before, but no, I don't think it'll jump into a safety management system. It's more of a diagnostic tool that will assess the health of that system, amongst other things like the competency of people, the health of the climate and culture in the organisation as well. So it's a bit broader.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Tristan, for your time today. I'm sure everyone has found what you've spoken about very interesting, and give everyone something to think about. So everyone, you can now pop back to the timeline and join the next session, where we will hear from one of our regulators from Safe Work New South Wales, Megan McCall. We'll see you soon.